Welcome to the Wednesday, January 13th, 2021 Planning Board meeting for the town of Raymond. The board does have a quorum, but I do not anticipate any votes this evening, so I'm going to dispense with our normal reading of the introductions. So to start off with, it is a workshop. We do have a bunch of ordinances to go through. To start with, I'd like to thank both Alex and Jim for putting all this together for us. I know it was a heck of a lot of work, and it makes our job a lot easier when it comes down to time to reviewing ordinances. And also, just so thanks, guys. And then just take a moment. On your screen is Tom Hennessy. Tom was interested in the Zoning Board of Appeals, but there's no they have a full board right now, and we do have an opening. So I asked Tom to join us this evening and kind of watch in and see what we do. It's not, for Tom, this is not kind of a normal meeting in that we're not looking at reviewing a project, but just for kind of review, half of our job, or maybe a third of our job, is also prepping ordinances for the town meetings. So there's two kind of funnels in the town. The financial stuff goes through the financial board, and all the ordinance work goes through the planning board. So sometimes we're looking at things that are not directly related to planning issues, but if it's an ordinance change or request, it comes through the planning board. So tonight, we do not have any reviews, any projects to review, but we do have a list of ordinances. This is kind of an annual thing that we start working on months ago, and we kind of build a list. Usually derived from what Alex or Jim sees as problems in the ordinance, or the board runs into problems and interpretations. So one more thing, just so that you know what you're getting yourself into, the plan, we kind of view projects based upon the ordinances. So ordinance work is kind of important to us, but we do not kind of make decisions based upon what the community kind of say wants on a particular project. Our decisions have to be based upon what the ordinances tell us we can and cannot do. So with that, I think, Jim, you've changed our order of events here. Nah, we can't hear you, Jim. Jim, you're muted. Jim.
Jimmy, where are you?
You're still muted, Jim.
Jim, you remuted yourself.
Mine's unmuted. There, are you good now?
Yeah, you're good now.
I didn't touch it, swear to God. I did change the order a little bit to kind of packet these up together in kind of topics to help us kind of go through. So road and backlot driveway both kind of deal with street and road construction standards. Those are the first two that we're going to look at. And I think the road section is the first piece of your packet. The biggest issue we have there is when we were doing a backlot development recently, we realized we had contradictory terms in our ordinances with road and street. Road had a different connotation as to what it is versus a street. Everything in our ordinance from a design practice uses the term street. Road, I think, is just a term that's been in that ordinance for a long time. And so where it's deeply delved into the ordinance, what we decided to do was strike it out into the backlot section, where that was one area that we noted that it was in, but there was several others. And rather than, you know, like we always try to do, is find every little road definition, we defined road. And if you scroll down through it, you'll see what we came up with. A term commonly used to describe a route or a track consisting of a bed of exposed mineral soil, gravel, asphalt, or other surfacing materials constructed for or created by the repeated passage of motorized vehicles. The term shall also include undedicated roads that are described in a recorded document. The term road shall not include those ways that have been discontinued or abandoned. For the purposes of the Town of Raymond land use ordinances, a road must comply with the standards set forth under the definition of street to be utilized for acceptable lot frontage or street front. Again, that's because we have in shoreland zoning and throughout all our ordinances, we've got these little nuances and changes in the definition. This kind of makes it all come back. This will be the consistent. We want to put this in all the subdivision ordinance, shoreland zoning ordinance, and site plan ordinance so that it is consistent throughout those ordinances. And in the event that road is defined somewhere in some performance standard, this sets it back to the basic of the definition so that essentially when somebody uses the term road for purposes of design, they are really implying street, and then they go into the street standards and street ordinance for how to construct and what you would accept for viable street frontage or lot frontage. Yeah. Any questions on that one? I think that one's a little straightforward. My description might have been long, but I think it's pretty straightforward what we're trying to do here.
We okay, guys? Great. Kevin?
Looks good to me.
Ed?
Okay, the next piece, which unfortunately in your packet is, I think, closer to the end. I'll see if I can find the page for you here.
Well, I don't need the pages to work. Just what item number?
It'd be the backlot ordinance, the road terminus, private road terminus and backlot driveway terminus.
Item number 4?
Fire lane, no parking sign on it.
Correct, yep. I'm just trying to pull it up myself here. Again, what we found with that is working with the fire department. We found that our standard in our ordinance doesn't really work that great for the fire department as far as being able to turn emergency vehicles around. So one of the things we want to do is make sure that that geometric configuration works for turning fire trucks around to what the equipment is we have today. The other piece of that we've run into over and over again is people illegally parking in these turnarounds or using them for parking, temporary or permanent parking lots for boats or whatever. That's not the case. So if it's not signed, then nobody can take any enforcement action. So by the fire department requesting the sign that you see there, that enables them to take some action in the event that they respond and they have to move something. They have the authority to do such. The only thing within that is there's some descriptions about street grades and brake angles, and that all makes perfect sense from a design practice. The only item in here that we need to have some discussion about is under summary of changes 1E, Roman numeral 4. Street grade shall not exceed 10 degrees along the entire length. Under our backlot driveway provisions standards that we have now, we do allow the road slope street. I said road, I'm in violation. The street grade is allowed to go up to 12%. What they are discussing here is under their provisions, they're not supposed to go up anything over 10%. I think there's some compromise in here that we may be able to look at. We haven't gone into that yet. I wanted to get some feedback from the board and let Wayne maybe describe what his concerns are as well. If it is a practical thing that the fire department can't do on an extended, lengthy run, we have a lot of properties in town that have excessive slopes and access issues. There may be a way that we come up with maybe a waiver criteria under this ordinance that allows for short sections to exceed 10% up to 12%, as long as we look at very carefully some safety criteria that will affect the maneuverability of the emergency vehicles or fire trucks. So I don't know if Wayne, you want to say anything to that, or whether any of the board members want to have any opinions or questions or concerns.
Wayne, is this an ordinance? Is this a directive out of the fire manual?
Wayne, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Wayne.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yep. And
Yes, it is it is the standard for fire department access where this 10% grade comes from. That's the standard that we work with. The National Fire.
we have regular roads in Raymond that are greater than 10%.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I'm sure we do. Yes.
Sure.
So why would we?
No, I know one road that the chief refers to a lot when we discuss this is like Tarkin Hill
Yep.
is greater than that. And that was a discussion that happened at that time. So,
Yeah, they've had, I think you had a winter incident up there where it was difficult for you. I can't remember, is it to get up or to get down?
get down.
Just because of the excessive slope and fear of icing conditions and going off the road.
Right.
So again, back to that idea of a waiver criteria, one of the things we would look at is trying to limit the length of anywhere where we had to go in excess of 10% up to 12%. And if it were on a curve, looking at safety provisions such as guardrails or other widening of the curves to allow for a more convenient turn of equipment. You know, like I said, we have a lot of properties in Raymond where access at 10% is, one, going to be very costly. Two, it's going to take, you know, likely a lot of blasting, and that gets into its own questions. And again, we've already got some roads in town, as you pointed out, that exceed that. I just think that probably from a public standpoint or a landowner standpoint, we might get some pushback on this. I just think that we don't want to necessarily box ourselves into a corner here where we can leave maybe some out for special cases, you know, where we do get into short bursts of steep slopes.
Yeah, and the chief and I discussed your email back to us on this with some of your thoughts on the waiver criteria, and we would certainly be willing to work with you to try to develop a waiver for that 10% grade for those backlot.
I mean, that's my opinion. Obviously, you know, I am an engineer, I work in the profession, but obviously I want to get some input from the board members and what their thoughts are as well.
Exactly.
Ed? Kevin? Greg? Anyone?
Is there a reason to limit it to the 12%? Could we even maybe make it more?
Well, you could, but I think what we found is we had a project. Floyd Brown had he wanted to do a backlot driveway or a shared driveway earlier. I think was it this year or last year, and we took the fire truck down there. That one was around 17%. And what happens, Greg, as we found out, is when those trucks go up that for an extended period of time, they actually lose water out of the tanker. And in the winter, obviously, that becomes an icing condition on top of losing the water. So there is a magical point there where just the slope, they lose water out of the trucks. I don't know if that's 12%, 14%. I don't know. I think the idea is you try to limit those to a short duration so the truck can come back and get to a more level.
Yeah, for sure. If you had a short distance with a 17% grade, it might not be an issue. So there's probably an issue of a ratio of percentage slope and distance.
Right, exactly.
Which is why maybe 12% is limiting us too much. So
maybe we can say in excess of 10% and just leave it at that, and then you let the whoever is designing that, you know, provide us the evidence that they can meet the safety criteria. And that's the crux is really coming up with what will be the safety criteria.
Yeah, understand.
Do we want to include in the regulation the way of getting a waiver, or just have it like other regulations where, you know, we can decide it in the meeting?
Well, I think we want a waiver criteria because I don't want to leave the general jurisdiction up to you to kind of make it up on the fly. I think it's a lot easier if the waiver criteria is in place. Then you've got something that you can at least follow as far as a standard, and it's all going to be around safety. That's going to be first and foremost, safety and fire truck maneuverability. And I think if they can meet that, if you can meet it with a fire truck, then you can meet it with basically anything else.
Right.
Well, I guess
Sorry.
I guess I would ask what the fire department might be comfortable with in terms of distance and degree.
Well, I was just going to ask a similar thing, but I'm surprised there's no national standard on that.
There is. That's where the 10% comes
Well,
from.
no, I mean, but no, I mean more than that. You know, like we've been discussing, the length of the slope and the degree, like a table that says here are acceptable approaches. You know. based on length and degree.
Yeah, because clearly in other regions, you take North Conway or somewhere up in New Hampshire where you have really steep, excessive slopes. Maybe they have different equipment, but I'll let Wayne speak as far as to the standards. But I really think sometimes it comes down to the equipment they may have.
Well, then that would be another, set of tables too, 4-wheel drive, what you're going up, the weight of the vehicle. I mean, it's just an engineering problem that you have to put those together.
Right.
Right.
And that's what we would work on with the fire department.
Right. I don't have an answer for you sitting right here at the moment as far as, percent of slope versus distance and what would work, but we can certainly try to look into that and work with Jim on that.
Yeah, we have things that, it talks about like K values, which is a derivative of slope versus distance of the curve and everything like that. And I'm guessing that there's probably something on a national level that talks about the K value that's acceptable for a fire truck, in a low speed limit. That's also derived on a speed limit basis. So if you're going slow, obviously you can do a little bit more. If you're going fast, and transitions can cause more problems. Because that's also going to be a transition. When you're going from 17%, somewhere you got to belly out because we can't come off a street at 17%. So there's a transition in there as well. We don't want the tanker or fire trucks bottoming out.
So if we go 10 degrees here, we're going to be in conflict, right, with our.
If we go 10 here, we are in conflict with our table in our street ordinance. That's all I'm pointing out. So either this changes, then the street ordinance is going to change, or either way, Bob, I think we're probably going to get into both ordinances to tweak a little bit.
Okay.
The only way we don't tweak it is we just say 12% in backlot driveways and leave it at that. But it sounds like we don't want to necessarily recommend that 12%. Sounds like we really want to do our best to keep it at 10. Except for unique cases or situations where we can limit the big butt.
So we're going, am I hearing we're going to leave it at 10, but we're going to try to come up with some sort of waiverable condition that addresses a steeper slope for a shorter period of time? Is that?
Sounds good to me.
Works for me.
Yeah, we'll work on that.
Okay.
Make
We'll
Wayne work.
Yeah, Alex and I will work with Wayne and Bruce to come up with some language there or some waiver criteria. We'll try to keep it short and sweet, but obviously safety is first and foremost.
Right. Ed, that sound okay?
Okay.
Hey,
Next,
Jim,
yes.
one question on the terminus is that you put in your packet. Do you know what the radius is of that terminus?
I don't, but I can look it up. I don't know off the top of it right now. I'm guessing it's probably around 20 feet, 20-foot radius for that fillet, but I will double check that, and we'll work with you on that as well. As far as what we'll do, let the board know, in our street ordinance right now, we have an appendix which has an example of the terminus, which I believe is in this packet as well. We'll revise that and match what is acceptable to the fire department, and we'll fill in those radiuses to what works with the fire truck. So when you see this next time, you'll get an updated terminus detail as well. This one that's in here right now is the one that we have currently in our ordinances. We haven't revised it yet to match the fire department's request.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, by the way, it's,
I'm sorry, you're okay with backlit and private road terminus as we go? Okay. All right, Jim.
all right, the next one is clearing of vegetation. Right now, we really have it restricted. Alex, is it 15% of the lot? Is that 25? 25.
Yeah.
Yep. All lots are restricted to a 25% lot clearing. And I think it might have been Greg who brought this up to us that in some cases, these people have decent sized lots and they may want to tree harvest, and we really have restricted them in doing such. So what we came up with, and I'm trying to dig it up here, give me just a second, is to change it in the ordinance so that folks can clear to a certain level, and then where is it?
Page 36 of the PDF, if you're on
Thank
that.
you. Yep. All right. Let me see. Perfect. Okay. What we would like to do is, if they only wish to cut trees, then the threshold would be 15. I'll get this out here. Without a minor site plan approval from the planning board for any clearing removals, vegetation or stumps regarding above this threshold. So they have right now up to 15,000 square feet or 25% of the lot area. What we would like to do is, if they want to go higher than that for tree cutting alone, then they have to get a permit from the code enforcement officer and just prove that it's been part of a harvesting plan done by a forester. Anything for clearing would require a minor site plan review. And the reason we thought that was, if we're just cutting trees, we're not getting into as much soil and erosion concerns, what could contaminate runoff, get into waterways. Once we start grubbing, we are getting into a situation where we're opening up the land for vulnerability of erosion and contamination of nearby waterways. That's something we want to be much more careful about than just the cutting. So that's the plan at this point, would be permit by code officer if it's for cutting. Anything over 15,000 would need a minor site plan review.
Greg, you're up.
I was looking for something a lot more simple, like change it to 75% and not all that other stuff. I'm not looking to make things more difficult. But have in addition to this, in regard to we've got 600-foot shorelines all around all our lakes, 100 feet around all the mapped streams. And why we have to do this beyond that point to protect the waterways is questionable. And I talked to Chris Hansen about that. I hope it was all right with the planning board that I did that because he's familiar with the issues that surround his concern over this. And I asked him if Wyndham did anything similar, and he said no. But he did say that they have an impermeable limit. I think that may have been 25% in Wyndham. But we like to look at other towns in terms of what they do for ordinances. And Wyndham doesn't do anything like this. They don't limit how much you can clear.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, because the impermeable limit makes sense, but some people like open lots, some people like trees, and you're taking the choice away from them.
Well, the issue that I have with it, the only issue I have with that is, when we look at phosphorus export, which is the main contributor to obviously our lake and water quality, if you take a forest and you make it a lawn, you are going to add phosphorus to your local waterway.
Well, you're assuming they're going to be fertilizing the lawn. Yeah,
maintain. So that's the caveat. Again, the tree cutting was just to make sure there is a cutting plan that's not done haphazardly. Anybody who cuts it for harvesting is going to engage somebody like Greg or somebody with a forestry background if they're cutting for purposes of timber harvesting. As far as for clearing to have a big lawn, again, if this were in a subdivision, and I'm just throwing this out, if it were in a subdivision, we would make them either limit or provide a stormwater computation to show that they're meeting the phosphorus export. In this case, you're saying, all right, I have 10 acres, I can clear cut whatever I want, as long as I've got a forester. As soon as you go over 50,000 square feet, we just want to see a plan as to how you're going to regulate that clearing. It's not that complicated.
Well, my point was, let's take the lawns out of it. My point is, if somebody wants to put in solar panels and they got a bunch of trees in the way, and they want to put in a fairly good sized solar panel installation that works, you've got to cut a fair amount of trees. And if you have a small lot, that's going to exceed easily the 25% limit. And the solar panels is not I mean, that's a lot of people are starting to do that now.
But how big are a solar panel for a single family home?
If you
Because like,
have a
once you
con-
go
if you
beyond a
have a-
single family home, now you're in a commercial use, you're in a utility service. If you're feeding back to the, like we see a lot of these solar farms, they're feeding back. It's a solar.
right, if you're
That's
just
a
doing the
commercial
feedback
use.
thing, but that the direction of solar panels is to store your own energy. So
I'm
therefore,
on board. Yeah, no,
and
I'm
you, and you,
fine
and
with
you, I
it.
know I'm saying but you put more panels in to do that to get you by the low periods, the dark periods or the snowy periods. So you put more panels in, gather more energy. And so I'm just saying we're going to probably see more panels, and that leads to having more open sky. I think we should just, put that in as something to consider.
I mean, we can put in there, I don't know what we want to call a solar panel a utility, but we could put something in there as far as for utility purposes of utilities on the lot. You may exceed that as well. Again, I guess,
I mean, you could also put in, don't the lawn, the phosphorus concern, and I agree with that too, but just putting in a blanket 25% just seems to be rather
and
harsh.
that's what's in there right now. So that's
Right.
what we're working with.
Oh,
I mean,
no, right.
that piece I didn't add. All I'm just saying is that if you want to change it to 50% and say anything over 50%, you got to get a permit. I don't know. I think 75%, we're going to open up maybe some issues with some people who clear out their lot, and all of a sudden the buffers are gone and things like that. Plus, you got to remember too that if it's part of a subdivision where there are restrictions, the subdivision restrictions override this
Oh, yeah.
request.
So I'm in favor of some sort of restriction, maybe 25% can go up a little higher. And I really like the part about if you do any grubbing, stump removal, that sort of thing, we really need to protect that. I think that there's a little bit of an issue. I mean, I know that in general, we want to be able to use our property as we want, but I think there is an issue with how removing a whole bunch of trees can impact surrounding lots in terms of just what it looks like. Specifically, there's a little lot on 121 just after you leave 302, and I don't know if they clear cut the thing. I don't know how big the lot is, but they've cut a whole bunch of trees. And to my eye, it looks terrible in terms of what the neighbors are looking at. So I just think there's a little bit of concern that we ought to have regarding abutting lots as well as the lot in question.
Yeah, I would agree. And actually, Kevin brings up a good point that I think we really haven't addressed is, I mean, if we are truly going to be going to a lot of solar panels and we are going to be cutting lots for solar panels, I mean, is that something that we need to look at as far as the amount of land that's going to be devoted to solar panels all across the town? I mean, do we want a town that has nothing but solar panels?
Yeah, this is starting to be this is starting to pick up a little momentum as we've seen a massive burst of solar farms across the state.
Yep.
It's something that planners and towns are starting to ask some questions on because some of these farms are massive, and you take a nice open farm field and suddenly now it's full of black squares everywhere. Some people have absolutely no problem with it, and some people think it's an eyesore. From a standpoint of the DEP has taken on them because they are low impact on the land. They really haven't made them do anything as far as stormwater. The biggest issue has been most of these farms have gone into open areas, but some are now popping up into wooded areas and are clearing and grubbing those areas. So DEP does get some involvement with those. But I don't think we've thought about this on an individual basis, and without consulting somebody from the solar industry, I wouldn't have a clue at this point what would be a decent amount of land that somebody would need to operate a solar array in a manner that they can generate 100% of their own electricity.
Yeah.
Kev, you're on mute, Kevin.
It's not so much just the land because it's the open sky. So you may only have 50 feet wide and maybe 8 feet high of solar panels, like say on top of your roof. but you need to have the view, you know, that the trees are in the way, left and right of that, to gather the energy from morning to night to the evening. So it's a lot more than just where the panels are.
Understood.
So
Yeah, you need that southern orientation to get
Right.
maximum
right
sunlight.
from east to west, because you're really going to gather all day to make it
Right.
worthwhile.
And honestly, when we get down on the shoreline zoning, that obviously becomes an issue. But I think most of our lots are 2 to 3 acres minimal. So, you know, you're talking 25% there. You're talking half an acre that could be available for most lots. So that's a fair amount of land that you have available to put, you know, a few arrays in to generate electricity for your home. I get there may be cases where it's more, and maybe we can look at putting something in there for self utilities or something like that. You know, we didn't think of that when we were looking at it.
Well, Mike's concerned about grubbing and so forth. I think the Clean Water Act regulates if you disturb more than an acre of land, you got to install all those silt fences and that sort of thing. I don't see that as an issue that we have to address.
What about if it's less than an acre though?
For some reason, it's not regulated below that amount.
Well, maybe
Don't
it should be.
Why? We put limits on all kinds of things. For some reason, 1 acre was, as far as I know, unless Jim knows anything different than me about the Clean Water and when it triggers the.
It depends on your proximity, or it depends if you're in the watershed at risk, different thresholds. It's 20,000 square feet of impervious, and usually anything over an acre requires you to get a permit by rule from DEP. Again, you know, just that, maybe Alex knows, but when somebody cuts an acre in a residential zone, I'm sure he probably gets a phone call or two from time to time about what's going on, what's going in there. Again, we're not asking for a whole lot here. It's just a permit through the code officer if they're cutting. Grubbing, I do think, if you're grubbing, what's the purpose for grubbing? Are you creating a larger lawn? Or again, if it's agricultural, it doesn't fall under anything. It's exempt.
Yes, yeah, I don't see a problem with that, creating a larger lawn. I know you do.
Well, I mean, if everybody has a 2 acre lawn, suddenly we got some runoff issues. From an engineering perspective, it's just what happens.
Yeah, no, Maine soils are very acid that typically doesn't go very far. I think a lot of your runoff is immediately next to these lakes. I don't think it's 600 feet or more back from 100 feet from streams. That's my opinion. So that's where
I think the DEP looks at it as if it gets into a water body, gets into a stream, you know, once it gets into the stream, it's in the stream, and until it, you know, has a chance to settle out, it's going to transport. I think that's the concern.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt.
But again, this is your decision. You as a board, I'm just presenting you, you know, what we see as common practice. Again, I agree with you. I haven't seen the 25% in a lot of ordinances. Some towns have it. I'm guessing it probably evolved from some old state model, and some towns have probably phased it out and others haven't. I don't know if the 25%, if it's an arbitrary number, if it's based on, it's an old number. It's been in the ordinance for a while. I'm fine if you want to move that north or south. But I do think that I'm definitely fine with clearing of trees. But when we start getting into grubbing large areas, I think the town, again, should just take a careful look at what's going on and make sure that erosion and sedimentation, maybe it doesn't need to be, again, this would be a minor site plan. This doesn't go to board. This would be a staff review. So it's not as cumbersome as you might think.
Well, the issue is that of maturing trees. I visited a lot of lots where people have trees that have gotten too big, they can't handle them, and they have no way to get them down except to hire a company with thousands of dollars to remove these trees. So there's a concern on the other end too. If you, you know, people are required to keep their trees to the point where they become a liability, that's not a wise thing for the landowner or homeowner either.
And I don't think we're meaning to restrict that. I think all we're saying is just you got to just get a simple permit or a notification to the code officer if you want to cut those, and that's very simple. I don't think that's a huge burden on anybody.
Yeah, it's another step, yeah, but
I mean, that's not even me. That would be just Alex,
Well,
making sure
I
that
know.
they've got.
Well, you know me, I think we just have too much government in our lives. So.
No, I never knew that from you, Greg. I don't know what you're talking about.
Hey, I'm doing the best I can.
Greg,
This is not a Jim and Greg show. Others, please feel
Yeah.
free to chime in.
No, all of these things are reasonable to discuss for sure. I don't have any issue with that.
So where do we, Bob, I'm going to take your line. Where do we want to go with this, folks?
Well, I like the way the thing's written, and I harken back to that lot I drive by now every day, and they've got a big pile of dirt and trap and stumps, and it is being protected for erosion, but it needs to be. And I think the minimal review that we're doing here is going to help make sure people do the things they need to do to protect from runoffs and that sort of thing. And also, I think it might help protect against larger clearings than what is sort of sensible for neighbors to look at.
Now, to that point, I just want to make clear that agricultural purposes are exempt, and maybe, Kevin, we can find a way to exempt some utility provisions as well.
Yeah, that would be good. At least something in there to, to me, promoting, green energy is a good thing.
But when as written, it doesn't exclude that, Kevin. It just is going to require a permit.
Right. I mean, I guess that depends on who's sitting in the code office at the point, because that's kind of his purview then, right? I mean, I don't care about getting a permit as long as it's not going to be denied. I think there should be something in the ordinance to say that that's a permitted or.
That could be good, but like any permit, it's appealable to either one or two, right? If it's our ordinance, it comes to us, or it goes to zoning board of appeals. It goes to one if the permit's denied.
Alex, what happens now if somebody comes in, and I don't know when this has happened, because again, most of our lots outside shoreline zoning are fairly large, maybe in the village, but have you had any cases where you've had issues with people clearing the lot for other things?
There's been two since I started. One would be the Starretts across the street, but that has been an ongoing issue for a couple of years, and they do have a open notice of violation, which does include the clearing limitations in that. And then the other one would be the one that I'm assuming Mike's talking about, which is 7 Main Street down near 302. That's another one. I didn't specifically cite them on this clearing limitation because I couldn't exactly prove that they've cleared more than 25%. I do feel like they have probably cleared more like 75, but it wasn't as easy to prove as the Starretts one is, because the Starretts done on Eve in sometime between 2016 and 2018. So it's very easy to see through aerial imagery on Google. So it's very easy to calculate exactly how much has been cleared. So it is something that is taking place, but the key word in this section, I think, is development. Because if they're not clearing for development, it kind of goes out the window, but that's just my opinion. And I do know that's how Scott and Chris also viewed this.
So when you say development, you mean like the initial building of something and installing the related stuff like septic? So like if a house is already there and they've got all their everything in, septic and so forth, then the 25% isn't applicable?
No, I mean, I would look at it as if someone's clearing to build a house, that's clearing for development. But if there's already a house on a lot and they've got, a substantial amount of land, say they've got 3 or 4 acres behind the house, if they just want to do a harvest, go down in there and clear a bunch of the timber off of it, they're not clearing that for development. They're simply clearing it for harvest, and it's just going to go back to its natural state over time. That in my mind, that wouldn't be clearing for development because there is no conversion of the land. It's simply just a harvest.
So currently under your reading, we don't have any limits on that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, the Department of Forestry has a whole set of laws that they require timber harvests to follow. And Greg knows all about those. And we're actually a state enforced town as far as the shoreline goes. And there's very specific rules to timber harvests. So there are limitations to what you can do, what you can't do. But it's a whole other rule set and it's pretty lengthy.
Just as an FYI, we do not define development under the land use ordinance.
Sorry for opening such a can of worms.
I mean, it's a good discussion though. I mean, it does lead into, I mean, every once in a while, every 10 years, somebody tries to come in here and manipulate these ordinances to their benefit. So it's a good practice to do it before somebody else does it to us.
So is it the opinion, Alex, are you pretty comfortable with like the scenario we just described where there's already a house and they got 3 acres and they just want to do basically some harvesting? Are you pretty comfortable with the forestry regulations in terms of protection for maybe cutting too much so it's a blight for the neighbors? Or I'm sure, I would guess that the erosion concerns are pretty well covered. What do we think?
Well, most of the time, I mean, Greg knows more about the practice and what goes on with tree harvesting, but most of the time you're not ripping the ground up when you're tree cutting. I mean, yeah, you're going in with a skidder, or what time of year you go in can make a difference, and conditions can make a difference as far as mucking it up a little bit. But for the most part, you aren't really doing substantial soil damage such that you're going to get major erosion, unless you're on really steep slopes or something.
You can do that without cutting a single tree.
Absolutely. But once you go in there and you formally decide I'm going to stump this and grub it, now you've made yourself vulnerable. So I guess that's all I was coming at. And then the question is, if you own 10 acres and you cut 75% of the lot, that's still a fair amount of trees. But if you have 2 acres and you cut 75, that looks a lot worse.
Well, that's the thing. If you got a 2-acre lot and you're limited, you may need more than that by the time you put your driveway in and you build your house and you have your open area for your lawn. I don't know. It seems too small to me on a smaller lot. 25%. What if you want to have a garden or solar panels? No.
Again, if you want to go more than 25%, then maybe it's 50%. I don't know. I have no measurement or no way to figure out what other towns are doing, because it's obsolete in some towns and some are at 25.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. Except for what?
Alex, how would you make the call that Greg just described? If you have a 2 or 3 acre lot and somebody has all those things on it and they want to, cut some trees because they want to, on their barn, they want to put a bunch of solar panels to get and it involves cutting, let's say that 50% of the trees are already gone because it's a small lot. But now you got to cut enough so that the panels can get the light. What do you do? What do you say in that? If it goes up to 75%.
All we would say is you need to file a minor site plan through staff just to be quickly reviewed. And I think all we'd be really looking at there would be basically erosion control practices.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, then I think that should be put in, is what we're concerned with, is the erosion control practices.
Mm-hmm. And that's primarily what we'd be looking at, is erosion control practices, and what is going to become of that surface. Is it going to be a lawn? Is it going to be, if it's agricultural purpose, like I said, it's exempt. And if it's, and if we decide we want to put utilities in there, that could be exempt.
Yeah.
Well, just shorter trees.
I understand you want to, I mean, but the tree clearing is different than the grubbing. That's,
Yes, yeah, right, right.
you know, I get that.
But what it says in the article is clearing.
Right. And that's where you get into it because cutting and clearing are two different terms used in construction.
Right.
So it seems to me pretty, not real onerous on the property owner, because if the development wishes only to cut trees in excess of a threshold, then a permit must be obtained. Well, what's that permit? What's that going to be based on, getting that permit? I mean, I would think, well, I guess I don't know. What criteria is going to be looked at for that permit?
Good question.
Well, primarily, it's going to be erosion control of the tree cutting or for the clearing.
For just the tree cutting?
For the tree cutting, all we want to make sure is that it was reviewed by a forester, I believe.
Right.
Okay, well, that's not, to me, that's no problem at all for a property owner, or hardly a
Yeah,
problem.
up to Greg.
But I guess at this point, I'm a little more concerned about the issue of whether it's a development or not. So in other words, if there's an established lot and then someone wants to go cut a whole bunch of their trees, and that could really make things look pretty crappy for the neighbors. And this doesn't seem to protect that at all. Not to open a bigger can of worms, but that's kind of what I'm seeing on the site at 7 Main Street.
Yeah, and one of the things, Mike, that I've kind of run into with that one is my first conversation with him was, well, what are you planning on doing here in the back? Because he's cleared a bunch of land out in the back and it looks like he's going to build something. And he says, well, I don't know. I'm not planning on doing anything right now. If he had said, well, I would like to build X, then he cleared that for development. And
Right.
I can say, okay, well, you've cleared in excess of what you're allowed for development. But he doesn't currently have a plan to do anything. He just wanted to cut the trees. So is he clearing for development or not? You know, so it's something where if I'm going to take someone to court for it, my concern with that one is it is pretty open. We don't have a definition. And I would need some proof of them clearing for development. Even if it is, you know, it looks to be pretty clear.
Well, maybe I'm missing something here, but for my eye, I just as soon take out the whole issue of for development and just say for any lot, whether it's already developed or not. Because then that would sort of cover, you wouldn't have to get into that issue with the guy at 7 Main Street. And then to me, we're protecting all these types of scenarios, regardless of whether or not there's already a house or structure there, or whether or not they want to develop. To me, that's not the issue.
So you'd rather say something if the owner or property owner wishes to only cut trees.
Yeah.
I thought this was a simple one.
Yeah.
You know, I told Chris that
And
this could
sometimes
happen.
also in these things, we, we include the purpose of what we, have a little blurb, intro blurb to our ordinance. And in that purpose, we could kind of state what the goal of the restrictions are. And those being that we want to maintain, the water quality. We don't want to restrict, for utility development or solar panels or, along those lines. And I think that would answer Kevin's problem. Probably not Greg's problem because it's an ordinance, so it'll never answer Greg's problem. But,
I have a lot of faith in people.
but if we take out the development,
Not ordinances.
does that sound workable?
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah,
looking at
that's-
it's an article, it's within the article, and typically, just trying to look at our ordinances here as we're on the line here. Typically, under standards, we don't do
Yeah.
the purpose. I think rather than the purpose, I would rather just lay out what exemptions we would consider, whether it be for agriculture or whether it be for private utilities such as, but not limited to, solar panels, antennas, solar, I don't think anybody, well, there may be some still out there, the dishes, the satellite dishes and things like that. So I would be open to saying that those could be exempt from this standard.
As long as somewhere in there we include the erosion control as a primary responsibility.
Yeah, we can finesse some language in there for that.
Jim, I think that makes sense because I don't think anyone, based on the cost and expense of putting in solar panels, I wouldn't think someone's going to cut a whole bunch more trees than they need to get, the full day sunlight. So
Depends on-
maybe,
Yeah, it
if
shouldn't
we
be
just-
us.
if we just exclude that use from this ordinance, then maybe we're sort of not really creating more harm, and I agree with Kevin, green energy is good.
Yeah, and I think, to Bob's point, the purpose of this was to really just stop people from being able just to go and clear cut their lot for the sake of clear cutting their lot, or just to create massive lawns. I think we're all okay with a big lawn, just as you have adequate protections in there to protect your neighbors and the environment.
All right, everything okay? Ed, you
Okay,
okay?
so we'll clean that, we'll fix that up a little bit and add the provisions for utilities and for agricultural purposes and put a little erosion control language in there.
Okay. Next up.
Next one, I hope is easy. It has to do with the mixed use. This was just a case of, I think, a clerical error in the ordinance. It basically said that both floors had to be only for commercial uses. We know that's not the case. We do allow in mixed uses that we want residential upstairs and commercial downstairs. So it was really just a matter of clarifying what was what.
Anyone have any problems with that one? Good.
No.
All right.
Septic?
Next one has to deal with septic waste disposal. And I know Alex did a little research on this. I'll just quickly summarize, but then I'll let him chime in. Basically, when we're within a certain distance of, originally it was Sebago Lake, the Pool and Water District has its own standards and regulations for sizing of septic systems based on daily use per bedroom, because that's how we size septic systems in the state of Maine. When this ordinance was written, I think we just adopted that for all water bodies in the shoreline zone. And what we are thinking now is, if you look at that section 6, it just helps clarify it a little bit more that you shall meet the Pool and Water District wastewater disposal system permit protocol. One thing that we did discuss after that provision that Alex made is, we thought it would be more practical, easier for people to understand if that applied to just great ponds, because when perennial water body could mean anything from a wetland to a stream to any large area ponding water, and that's not necessarily the locations that we need to be that stringent on. It really is around the larger water bodies where that direct effluent can get into the lake quickly, and that's why it's a setback of, I think we use 250 feet, but I'll let Alex explain it a little more in detail.
I think you're doing a great job, Jim. I don't even think I need to say anything. He got that pretty much spot on. The Portland Water District is no longer on the 1988 regulations. They have a permit protocol that I think was most recently established and updated in 2014, something like that. But the big takeaway is they only regulate within 200 feet from Sebago. So our ordinance has taken that further and said all perennial water bodies within 250 feet. So, we talked about possibly amending this, weren't really sure how it was going to go, but we've at least set it up so that, like Jim said, we would get rid of the perennial water body and just say great ponds, and update the reference.
We also stayed with the 250 because we thought 200 was a number that most of us aren't familiar with. We're familiar with 250 from DEP standards, and we thought 250 was a better regulatory setback that everybody is aware of.
Yeah, we should do that with a 600-foot shoreline zone while we're at
I
it.
actually agree with you, Greg, on that. The rest of Raymond doesn't agree with us.
Oh gosh, that was what, 30 years ago or more? Yeah. I'm sidetracked, you know, so.
We're gonna be muting you pretty soon, Greg.
Any thoughts on that? And Alex, is it 100 gallons per day or 120?
120. So it goes up from the standard, which is 90 to 120 per bed.
And another reason we thought that this was still practical was that obviously now with a lot of lakefront development, we're seeing more Airbnb, seasonal rentals where there are probably more occupants in the structure. This provision that the water district put in was to be conservative so that these septic systems would be larger and be able to handle flow so we didn't get into failed systems. So I thought is that this is a good backup because we are seeing more and more rental properties with a lot more people than were probably anticipated in some of these single family residents.
Good point. Makes a lot of sense to me.
Concerns, problems? You okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
The next one is the ZBA findings, and Alex, I'm going to let you run with this one, but I think it's mostly about making sure there's a section they added in there about findings.
Basically, what this requires, if there's a variance granted, we generally will issue a certificate, and that gets recorded in the Registry of Deeds. And I thought that this was actually state law, but I could be wrong on that. But it is pretty standard and has been for many years that if a variance is granted, ZBA issues a certificate, and that gets recorded in the Registry of Deeds in order to record that and make sure that it runs with the property.
And just to clear, the first part of that I saw it was redlined. We actually made that change last session. It just was, I think, a carryover for the dates of the meeting.
Yes.
I remember that, yeah.
But this is important because it is a document that goes with the land.
Yeah. Again, makes sense to me.
I take it the Board of Appeals was involved in this one? Alex?
No, it was actually Mary that pointed this one out to me. It's on our application for the ZBA, and she had noticed that it wasn't actually in the ordinance, but it was on the application, and thought it might make sense to correct that.
All right, nice going, Mary. So you really do something in that office, huh?
Whoa! Whoa! Brave man, Bob. Brave man.
Yeah.
When you're on Zoom, you know, you got
Bob, I know where you live.
Hey, thanks, Mary. Better than me.
Okay, I think that one is pretty straightforward too. I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense. The next one would be junkyard regulation update, and that is on page 42 of your packet. And basically what's happened there is the state regulations, I believe, have changed, and this is the new section that describes that. Is that correct, Alex?
That is correct. The old reference was actually repealed at some point in time. I don't even know when, but so this would be the updated reference.
problems?
Again, more clerical than anything, I think.
Okay.
Okay, now we get into the next two topics have to do with the fire department. And I believe both of these, correct me if I'm wrong, Wayne, are basically the same as what we saw last year.
That's correct. That's correct.
this is just, again, again, we can have this discussion, but last year you did endorse this to go to the Board of Selectmen. It was at that level that they nulled it and subdued this. I don't know. So it's back again in 2021. I think everybody was here at that point. So again, it's just a recap. The sprinkler systems would affect any single family home over 4,800 square feet. And the NFPA one is to really just update the standards following the NFPA 101 provisions to the 2018 version. Is that correct?
That's correct. NFPA 1 and NFPA 101 to the
Correct.
2018
Yeah.
edition.
And that language has been just sitting there eagerly waiting since 2020. So,
I don't see any reason to revisit this here.
well, we just have to go through the formality of
Well,
again.
yeah, no,
endorsing
I
it.
know that, but I mean, as far as discussion goes, I think we kind of beat this one. Anyone have a change of heart since last year?
Can I just ask about, under Article 9, Section 4? It's on the last page of the small handout. The first sentence says, "A fire sprinkler system is required throughout any existing large residential, one family or two of 4,800 square feet or more." I'd sort of like to get rid of the word large. I just think it might cause confusion. I mean, it's clearly defined in terms of square feet, so I don't know that we need large. And I think if we leave the word large in there, it might allow some argument of some sort later on, or confusion.
That makes sense to me.
Okay, that's really a wordsmith issue, but we can address that.
All right.
And that was, again, Article 4.
Yeah, Article 9, Section 4,
Article 9, Section
the
4.
first sentence.
It's on page 3 of 3 of the handout.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Are we good with this now?
Yep.
Okay, now we go back and get into a little more, what I thought would be more discussion on tiny homes, tiny houses. That takes us back to the pages that started. Alex and I both have been trying to peruse this. The state, obviously I attached the legislative action that they took on this. It's still up in the air as far as a lot of the requirements. It looks like a lot, but when push comes to shove, it's really still a difficult thing for code enforcement officers to regulate. They did do a nice job, I think, as far as if you look at the piece I handled out, 80-C tiny home, they did define and have a decent criteria in there as what defines a tiny home. The issue I think that we're still struggling is where do we under what portion of our ordinance do we regulate these? You read through this and it talks about the axles and everything like that, and it starts to make you feel that it falls into the category of mobile home, but then it is a standalone structure. Our thought, at least my initial thought, would be to kind of put this into the same section as we did the manufactured housing. Just because, we had quite a discussion about that a year or so ago, and about foundations and what constitutes a structure and what's the regulations on that. Again, this will come down to a lot of what Alex will have to do as far as regulating this. So currently the definition says that the tiny home will not exceed 400 square feet. And the vehicle is without motive power. Tiny home does not include trailer, semi-trailer, camp trailer, recreation vehicle, or manufactured housing. I guess what I might recommend is we just take the state definition, put it into our terms of definitions, and then maybe just put tiny homes under that whole manufactured housing piece, but I'm sure somebody's going to tell me that they don't have to be a tiny home doesn't have to be manufactured and there's no certification and everything like that. So then I'll leave it to Alex to where we should go from here as far as the code side.
Yeah, I mean, Jim and I always struggled with this one. I think that that's probably pretty clear, but I mean, I reached out to other code officers. I reached out to our attorney, and I think what I got back from pretty much everyone was there's just not a whole lot of stuff out there for us to rely on right now. There's a, there's an IRC appendix for specific to tiny homes, and there's a lot of questions on the standard that the tiny homes are being built to. Is it similar to an RV, or does it more line up with like a park model type structure? The way that I've always looked at it, and really the way I'd like to continue to look at it, is if it's a stick-built tiny home, it probably should meet the standards that a large tiny home has to meet as far as specific to safety. So egress, and plumbing, septic, waste disposal, stuff like that. Electric should be done to the electric code. I mean, we still want to make sure that these dwelling units are safe and have to meet the bare minimum of a regular dwelling unit. They're just smaller and more efficient. I guess that's kind of where I'm leaning with it. And I think that what was recommended to me from a couple other code officers was, if we're going to look at bringing or putting anything into the ordinance, it might just be a definition to start and see where things go in the next couple of years and work with it. But the larger municipalities, there really isn't anyone out there that has a specific code or real standards for tiny homes.
I agree with you, Alex. I think we should have a standard that agrees with the current standard for larger houses, yet, in safety, electrical, plumbing, and everything, yet allow them to have smaller dwellings. I think a lot of the tiny homes that I've looked at, they've built them and they're very similar in construction to a full-size dwelling, but they're just smaller because one or two people can live in a very small dwelling very comfortably. So they don't require to have X amount of square feet in a living room or, kitchen or whatever. And it's more like, I'd say building yourself an apartment to house standards.
Kevin, do you see it with our manufactured homes and mobile homes, or do you see it more as just a normal residential
A
development?
downsized residential dwelling is what I see it.
That's what I thought you saw. Yeah. So in which case, what we would really need to specifically address it if it's just going to be under what we would consider to be normal single family construction. Alex?
Yeah, I do think it's important to define it, just because it's a term that is becoming popular in the industry, and people coming into town may just want to know, I want to put a tiny home in, and if it's void in our ordinances, then that just creates a lot of confusion. If we at least define it, it gives us some kind of baseline to start the review from a code standpoint. I guess in the definition that the state has, the only thing I would add, which I heard you say, Bob, is tiny home means a living space permanently constructed on a frame or chassis and designed for permanent living quarters. I would like to have the word dwelling in there somewhere, because we do define dwelling in our ordinances, and just so that people understand that there's no exemptions for tiny homes. They fall under our dwelling requirements. We can define it just so that if somebody does come along and wants to put some tiny homes in, they understand that it falls under this category.
And then just add the definition to our definitions.
Correct. Yeah, I think we'd add tiny home in our definitions, and then, just make sure that we refer to it as a dwelling or a dwelling unit.
Kevin, does that address?
And I think that it probably would.
Yeah, and that's what I was looking for. I mean, they can be manufactured tiny homes that meet standards, our standards.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can use that state model, that the definition that they have, we can just dress it up a little bit. So again, it refers to a dwelling unit.
I have a
I imagine-
question.
Oh, here comes the NFPA guy.
I'll let whoever else was jumping in first, and I can follow up.
Well, I
Yeah.
guess the only thing I would say would be in that definition, it might be best to say something along the lines of it's still needing to meet the requirements of a dwelling unit. So that, because what's going to happen here is there'll be dealers that, there already are dealers that are making these things to a different standard, and they're selling them to people saying, oh, they meet all of the requirements. You can use this as a dwelling unit. And then these people are coming in and saying, okay, I was sold this thing, and kind of similar to a mobile home where you get it and it's still legal and built to, the HUD standards. They think that they're just ready to pull it up and into the lot and they're good to go. So I think it would be best to have something in the ordinance that makes it clear that we don't have a substandard allowance for tiny homes. It needs to meet the rules for everything else.
Sure.
And under that definition, 80C tiny home, A gets into some American national standards. Do we want to strike that and maybe insert that language you just described, Alex? Because it does get into NFPA standard 1192, and I don't know personally what 1192 is. Wayne, maybe you do.
It's recreational vehicles.
Right.
So
We don't want that. We want it to be a higher standard.
Right.
Which is exactly what a few other code officers have told me, is this standard is essentially allowing someone to use a park model or an RV as a dwelling unit.
So, Alex, you and I probably can wordsmith this down a little bit based on this discussion tonight, and definitely take out that section A and change that around a little bit. But I think we've got a good sense of where the board wants to take this, and obviously where you need to take it so that you have some jurisdiction as far as how these are built.
Yep.
That work for the board?
Yep.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
Thank you. Moving on, I guess at this point, the last one is to deal with affordable housing. And I gave you some information here on the back end of this, which I got from the state actually, into incentives for affordable housing. Obviously, we've heard a lot of that in the news with some of the larger municipalities, as these prices for homes are skyrocketing right now. Affordable housing is getting more and more pinched and difficult to find. I believe our comp plan is already outdated, but one of the major components of a comp plan is to provide means for affordable housing and makes you eligible for a number of grants. I'm not going to get into where we are with any kind of comp plan. I mean, that's a discussion, another sidebar, but I think what Bob and Alex and I had talked about is how do we encourage developers or entice them to provide affordable housing, and where would we want that? So this again is just an early discussion on this. We haven't really developed anything. Our thought process would be we should really look at our village districts. One, because they are the center of our community, where smaller lot sizes are allowable, where services are more readily available for people with economic strain, and where it just seems to make more sense than to have them in remote areas of the town, to put them in the village district where transportation and amenities are much more easily accessible and affordable. So that would be the district that we'd be looking at. As far as what we would want to do for incentives, I don't know if we want to look at, if somebody comes in with a subdivision, do we want to look at a density bonus? Do we want to give them the ability to do less frontages? There's a whole gamut of things we can do, and I guess I'm just trying to get a feel for what the board thinks is a good approach to incentivize, the village district for some more affordable housing. We haven't seen anything since I've been here in town since 2012. Really for affordable housing. So just interested in what the board has for opinions.
Yeah, it seems like maybe some density reduction, reducing some of the density requirements, maybe that would make sense.
Yeah, and if for those board members, Bob and Greg, you folks who were here before, we used to have a density bonus for elderly housing over 65. Actually, we just reapproved a subdivision back a couple of years ago. They had that, and somewhere along the lines that got eliminated. Again, it is a difficult thing to. I think that was probably a difficult thing to enforce. You go up and knock on the door, can I see your AARP card? But it does become a little bit of a challenge as to make sure that people aren't subleasing or other people of under retirement age are living in those communities. But this one is pretty. It's a different beast. Just because you're trying to help out those that are in economic, stress or in a different place economically and can't afford. Right now, obviously, we're in a massive spike in real estate prices. Things are escalating extremely fast, and those people that are less well off are getting left behind, and they are a viable part of all of our communities. So how can we assist and provide them at least some development opportunities?
Let the restaurants open again.
Yeah.
All of the above.
But it is if we're going to do a comp plan, it will be a necessary component of our comp plan as well. And I know that there's discussion starting to spike about that, as well as, we need to start kind of looking at the comp plan going forward somewhere in the near future, because our old one is expired and outdated.
I mean, to me, it's kind of challenging for a town to try to promote affordable housing, because when we need it the most is in a situation like now where real estate prices are just going crazy.
Right.
And so why the heck is a developer going to build affordable housing when they can build something and sell it for a whole lot more? So it seems like a big challenge to find enough ways to financially incentivize that sort of thing.
Well, I think, Mike, what we see in a case like this is you get organizations like Avesta that are looking to, they're always looking in around Cumberland and Androscoggin counties to find affordable developments to put in apartment units or multi units for that purpose. So again, if an organization like that were to come to the town right now, they would be stuck utilizing current zoning densities. And if they did approach and we had something on the books, maybe we could fit a few more, multiplex units in or duplexes in or something like that.
Gotcha.
And I do think that we want to look at that from a standpoint, probably from the idea of multiplex or multi-units developments. It might make the most sense where affordable makes the most sense. Single family affordable housing is probably difficult just because of the land consumption. If we're trying to be efficient, I would think that a developer who is doing affordable housing would more likely come in with a multiplex type development, rental type properties.
So Jim, do you think we could do something along the lines of a density calculation, which at some, you would need to know where some sort of target point would be that would make it attractive enough for a builder to build? But
yeah, and I think you and I had a conversation too, is maybe we could even reach out, maybe reach out to somebody like Avesta or some organization that does a lot of these affordable housing projects and just see what is their breaking point or what is the incentive that they need to look at a community like Raymond. I know they're looking at a community like Poland right now. So they are starting to reach out more into the rural areas than just the urban centers.
And is it possible to look at something besides income, but have it targeted to the dwelling price?
Right. Well, when I say income, that's what I mean. It's what people can afford. So it's really the price of the unit that would be. And I think there's some information that may be available at the state as to what criteria, they would put that at. Like everything else, though, that bottom line is escalating.
Right.
It's like if you look at FHA now, I think an FHA is somewhere up in 300,000 range, for a first-time homer. That just seems crazy, but that's where it's gone.
Wow.
Anybody else have any thoughts as to what areas we might want to incentivize? I mean, there's things in there too that if you're on public water, obviously you get a higher density because you don't have the septic and well competing on the land. Some of this will play out basically on what can sustain on the land for sewer and water consumption. That is usually one of the bigger things we have to be careful about. But you know,
You
just
think
be
there are
interested.
there models, Jim, that we could copy off of?
Oh, I think for a community like Raymond, it might be a little thin stretched. When you get into the cities or in some of the Cumberland County coastal areas, obviously they've got things in there for affordable housing, but it's on a whole different. I mean, you got public sewer, public water. The densities can be much different. We can take a look to see what might be available in some of those communities and maybe see what the thresholds are that they use to find terms or things like that. But where we don't have a huge amount of our town on public water and we have no availability of public sewer, that in itself dictates what the land can hold.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Well, the issue is a lot bigger than Raymond, but
Absolutely.
nothing wrong with addressing it
No.
somehow.
No, and to your point, I mean, it gets into public transportation and everything that you can possibly imagine as far as, where we'd want to put these things. Again, that's why we thought the village, or close to the commercial district off 302, where people would be potentially connected to public transportation and again, amenities of the town close by. Shopping centers, service centers, we don't want these people utilizing their vehicles and racking up expenses as well.
Okay, so for affordable housing, I guess we can ask Jim and Alex to keep on pursuing, right? See if we can find some other models to look at.
Yeah, and just as a forewarning, this may be one that maybe just trickles over. Maybe this is a bigger issue that it might take a little bit longer time, but let's see what we can do in the short run. And if we don't feel we're comfortable with it, we can carry it into the next year. But obviously, again, this should be paired up with whatever we end up doing with a comp plan down the line as well.
Would it be feasible to study the vacant land that we have in town to see where this would work? I mean, there's not a lot of sites. You may have to look into maybe a zone change or something to provide incentive. Take a small residential area and change it to village residential
or we could add, I think that's where we were going, Ed, is that we'd be looking at maybe a new section of the ordinance. Right now we have open space ordinances for cluster development. Maybe we could come up with something equal that would be for affordable housing development.
Yeah, I think at least my take is that it would be easier to have a complete development that's affordable housing as opposed to bring in, say arbitrarily the price.
Right.
You have a division of single family houses that are going for 200,000, and if the developer sells one house for 100,000, he gets an advantage.
He gets the vote. No, I agree with you that's why I was like saying it should be like an affordable housing development ordinance where again, it's, if they come in with that, then they get the benefit, because to your point, like we did with the elderly housing, somebody comes in here and they maximize the density and get 6 extra units in there, and 5 years down the road, we have no idea who's living in there, and they could be on the market for back to every market price or no age restriction. It's just difficult to track, where if you do an affordable development, the whole thing, it has to meet the criteria. Any other thoughts?
No, I think that's we'll look for some models. We'll have the density calculation. We'll look to see what will make it attractive, and it will be a solely affordable housing development, no mixed use.
Yeah, and I think, maybe offline, Bob, you and I, and Alex, maybe we can get a Zoom meeting with somebody like from Avesta to understand what they look for suitable development.
Good. Okay. Timeline. So I'm guessing that there's no real major problems. We've got, where our timeline would be, we'd have to have our public hearing in March. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's typically when we've done them in the past. We have it in March, and that time it gives the council or the Board of Selectmen time to review our recommendations and process it to get it out in front of the town meeting, typically held in June.
So we would need the ordinances ready for voting in our next meeting.
I would say yes.
Right? I mean, this is January. February, we would need the ordinances to vote on, to send that, to have the, no, excuse me, we'd have the ordinances review.
Right.
Correct.
March, we would
Yeah.
have the ordinances ready
Right.
for the voting.
You need a full red line review version ready for the next meeting.
Correct,
And then we'd have a public hearing in March.
right, with the vote.
Right.
Is that doable? With the exception of the affordable housing, is that all doable for you guys?
Yeah, Alex, I think most of it's there. It's just a little bit of wordsmithing. I don't think there's much work at all there to have that ready for the next meeting, red line.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. For those, for you late arrivals, I asked Tom to join us this evening. Tom, just as a repeat, was interested in the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I asked him to join us tonight to see if he would consider the Planning Board for our openings, and the Zoning Board of Appeals does not have an opening, and hopefully we didn't scare him away. Tom, do you have any questions for us?
Well, you haven't scared me at all. So,
Good.
but I stayed silent on a lot of those issues because I have my own questions, I guess, on some items of concern. But no, you haven't scared me away.
Okay, great.
Well, Tom, feel free to come back when we have a public hearing.
Well, that might be scary. But just so you know, I do have a semi-engineering background. And,
Perfect.
yeah, spent a lot of years at Bath Iron Works and in the Navy.
So we can sign you up, Tom?
Let me think about that. Just yeah, Mary warned me about this meeting versus the other ones.
Yeah,
For that bad, huh?
with the exception of she probably likes this meeting better, right?
It seems less contentious so far.
All right, so is there anything else we need to talk about? Yes.
I don't believe so. And Alex, I am not aware of any applications that are forthcoming to the board. Are you?
No, not at this time.
So as we stand right now, it looks like we'll again be doing ordinance review at the next regular meeting.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Let's do it.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Oh,
Aye.
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 Ed, we're done.
Woo-hoo.